I wanted to remind you of this diagram that I shared with you a couple of weeks ago. It was introduced to me at a workshop where we were talking about the root causes of hunger. So the reason I want to share it with you again is because it helps us wrestle with what the root causes are of our fear around mental health. Because it's the fears we have around mental health that perpetuate a culture of behavior whereby we stigmatize people who have mental health. And I've included for you a little questionnaire. Two of them allude to this. First question, true or false? Just 50% of Canadians would tell friends or coworkers that they have a family member with mental health. True or false? True. Yes, while at the same time, 72% of Canadians would share with their coworker a diagnosis of cancer, and 68% would talk about a member of the family having diabetes. In 2008, 46% of Canadians thought people used the term mental illness as an excuse for bad behavior. True, yeah. Furthermore, 27% said they would be fearful of being around someone who suffers from serious mental illness. So, once again, we need to look deep within ourselves and within our culture and go, wow, what is it that we believe or think that we aren't even aware of that has created a climate that is not safe for those who feel vulnerable to speak about the challenges they wrestle with and therefore to seek help concerning the challenges they wrestle with. So I'm going to play for you about 6 minutes of a video of a Canadian woman who decided that she was going to share her story. And I'm going to jump around just a couple of pieces. We don't need to hear the whole thing. But I think the thing that's most interesting to me is how she talks about how long she insisted to live with a mask on.
When I first got my diagnosis, I was embarrassed and ashamed and humiliated. And this was definitely something that I felt that I needed to cover up. If a friend had come to me about 5 or 6 years ago and told me that they were bipolar, I probably would have said, wow, thanks for telling me, and I would have slowly backed away, and I probably would have put some distance between me and them. And just knowing that I would have reacted that way is proof to me that there were very negative stereotypes and stigmas in regards to people with bipolar and mental illness in general. Unfortunately, the media does a fantastic job of splashing the craziest parts of this, all over the front page of the newspaper or as the headline story of the 6 o'clock news. And so, oftentimes it's the only face of mental illness that people get to see. When I was genuinely happy and buzzing around town, and I was living in full color, full throttle, and so on those days I absolutely could be the life of the party. And if there was a karaoke machine or a microphone nearby, you can guarantee I would be the first one to grab it and belt out a tune totally off key. And so on those days, I had moments of genuine, happy, high energy, happy-go-lucky joke-telling Julie. Unfortunately, that was not the case most of the time. And so, on most days I had one of two choices. I could hide away, and so that meant screening phone calls, not answering texts, definitely not answering the front door. Now, of course, there were the times when I couldn't hide out, and so, whether it was an important meeting or a birthday party or a wedding, on those days I, would put on my perfect mask, and I think I was pretty good at it. The only Julie that anyone ever saw was full color, happy-go-lucky, joke-telling, karaoke-singing Julie. So it finally did take the fear of losing my family to get me to a place where I was willing to go and get help. I remember the day I went to the doctor. I was a total brat. I didn't want to go. To be a grown adult and a wife and a mother, and then have to go in and tell another adult that I was a wreck, and that, on some days it was all I could do to just brush my teeth and pull my pants up. And then I remember the day I had to go and see the psychiatrist. I knew I was hitting the big leagues, so, I dressed up to the nines, and I even put on a pair of heels, and so I walked as confidently as I could into the building. I was hoping that people might think I was, a doctor or an intern, a postal worker, maintenance guy. I just needed to look like anybody but someone that was there for an assessment. I had no idea that there are different types of bipolar and different levels of severity, and so I am bipolar 2, and so the best way for me to describe it is a little less tiger blood running through my veins, and I guess I'm a roller coaster with a lower height requirement. And so basically what that means is my manic episodes are a little less but my depressive episodes are just as dark. So for me, the right thing was to get on medication, and what my medication does is just levels me out. And so, it shaves off the highs of the highs and brings up my lows to a point where most of the time I'm living life in a great state. I've even moved abroad, and I'm living.
We cannot talk about mental health issues without talking about shame. You could hear it in Julie's story. It goes something like this. There's something really wrong with me because there's something really wrong with me. The sign that shame is present in our lives is that prelude. Let me give you some more examples. There must be something really wrong with me because my marriage is not working. There must be something really wrong with me because my child keeps getting into trouble. There must be something really wrong with me because I can't control my eating. And because I'm afraid that there's something really wrong with me, I'm afraid to tell anybody who I am. And so I will put a mask on, and I will hope and pray that no one can see the incredibly flawed person beyond the mask. This fear of being judged was behind the comment I heard a number of years ago. It came from the father of a friend of mine who said that he always felt the safest at his AA meeting, where the first sentence that came out of everyone's mouth was, "Hello, I'm Robert and I'm an alcoholic," which means I'm anything but perfect. I've made mistakes, some of them absolutely horrific. I have hurt people, I've hurt myself, but I do not live in shame anymore. To which the circle responds, "Welcome, Robert." I think that the conversation around shame is a little bit different than the conversation around our culture's addiction to perfection. I think it's connected to the comments that Gabor Mate made in the video that I showed a couple of weeks ago, where he talked about this myth of normal. But I think we need to go even deeper and think about what the roots of shame are in our culture. I suspect that in most cases, those who struggle with mental health are more imprisoned by their shame than by their diagnosis. So, if we're going to talk about how shame imprisons us, I think we're going to have to talk too about the culture of judgment that we live in. And we're going to have to ask ourselves then, what is it in us that drives us to be judgmental. I have a hunch that the degree to which we are judgmental of others is in direct proportion to the degree of our own shame. Think about that. I think it goes like this. I feel flawed in ways I cannot even describe. But I hide my own sense of being flawed, and at the same time am vigilant in my quest to discover the ways that others are flawed. Why? Because then I don't feel so flawed. So the next question might be, if we live in a culture where so many would admit secretly to feeling flawed, where does that come from? Well, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke about the whole consumer culture that we are swimming in that leads us to judge one another by our ability to consume, our ability to hold down a job, our ability to own a home. And the result is unprecedented levels of anxiety among our youth, which I'll talk about next week. But what else is in our culture that might be the reason for such high levels of shame? So I don't know what the research says. I'm just going to share with you what my life says, or years in ministry have indicated to me. To begin with, the church for centuries told people that they were born in sin. And depending on what denomination you were in would determine how deep that pile of sin was that you were born in. So most churches began with a prayer of confession. And if I read to you from the Book of Common Order, only 40 years old, produced by this denomination, I guarantee that you would cringe. Though some of you might find those words to be strangely familiar. So the service began with a confession of how bad we were, but thank goodness God was forgiving. So that's the first thing. And then I don't know how many of you grew up with the expression, pride goeth before a fall. Anyone? Anyone? Just the Christian Reformed guy down there, the rest of us not. I know that my own paternal grandmother, who was raised in a very conservative Christian household, it was Missouri Synod, felt that it was her Christian duty to make sure that none of her 8 children thought too highly of themselves. And speaking of church, we won't even open the whole can of worms around the church and sexuality. Even now, we know that being gay in many denominations will ensure that you feel ashamed of who you are. So let me add a few more things that are not easy things to think about. If you had a parent who was mentally ill, if you were physically, emotionally, or sexually abused as a child, either by someone you trusted or a stranger, if you were raped at any age, the chances are that you kept all of this information a secret because the culture and or the perpetrator would have sent you a message that we don't talk about these things and it was your fault, or we kept them inside the family. And so there are a lot of different circumstances throughout our lives that might contribute to our feeling a deep sense of shame. And while we have come a long way in our ability to talk about these things, once the damage is done, particularly to a child, it's a hard road back. And I think there's another thing that's a bit of a mystery, and that is to recognize that some people are simply more resilient than others. And that too probably results in more shame. Like, how come I can't get over the abuse I experienced as a child? My best friend experienced the same thing and she seems to be fine. Why do I feel so stuck in this? So, shame. If we knew where it came from and knew how to respond, it wouldn't be such a rabbit hole. But it's been a weapon forever. I mean, think of Job's friends. They were quite happy to suggest that there was something really wrong with him. And if he would only return to God, then God would bless him. I wonder how often we have found ourselves thinking about someone else who, maybe they're depressed, or maybe they have bipolar, or maybe, who knows? But you kind of go, maybe you should just stop playing the victim. Or maybe you should just get more exercise. Or if you'd only just get it together. Like Job's friends. Get it together. So if our goal is to create a safer place for those who are vulnerable, what then is the invitation? Well, first of all, I think it's the words of that great song by Michael Jackson. I'm looking at the person in the mirror. He says the man, the woman. I think it has to do with getting at the roots of judgmentalism that exists within us. And to think about why it is that we have a tendency to look for the speck in someone's eye, maybe as a means to make us feel better. Second, and this is big, so I won't say anything more, but I think we need to be really honest about how our individualist culture combined with our consumerist culture has resulted in a lot of people who, by virtue of the new rules about what it means to be successful, end up feeling like a failure. Third, we need to give up some of the following things for Lent. Remember when everyone said, what are you giving up for Lent? Maybe that was just the Catholics. But I think we have some things to give up. I think we have to give up an understanding of God as judge or as one who punishes. I think we have to give up an understanding of God who is on the side of the righteous or the Christian or any other special group. Which means we need to take Scripture and we need to put it in its place. We need to argue with it. We need to challenge it. And we need to hold up the core values like compassion and justice that will determine how we as a community will chart our course. But then we need to recognize that Jesus brought close to him those whom the culture shamed. So if we are followers of this teaching, we too need to walk alongside those whom the culture shames. And finally, we need to learn to love ourselves for who we are.